All right. Hello, hello, hello. Georgia Burning Center, your favorite veterans. We're here doing the piece on Civil War soldiers and their contribution to our country. All right, stay tuned. Here we go.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank everybody. I'd like to thank everybody for the patience and understanding and listening to what Mr. White has to present here. So what we're going to do is have a presentation of what the Black Civil War soldiers contributed to our country and to us being able to have the unity that we are, have become accustomed to. So, no further ado, I have Mr. John White here.
Yeah, first I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you take a lot, get a lot out of this, and take a lot of it away. That big thing that you'll know is that the history that we're going to go over is supposed to be American history, but it's not. And it's not going to be American history until we ask for the history. And we can't ask for the history unless we know the history. So I can't give you a full history that is the history of 40 million people. But I'm trying, I can't do it in, an hour or so, but I'm going to try. But what the big thing to take away is that what we're not learning and to understand that we have to learn our history. And this is good information, okay? And I think that you'll like it. Can we start? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Well, okay, okay, well, we can do this. What we can do. Well, that's starting up. The first thing that uh, we're going to start with this. This is the Battle of Nashville, okay? And this is where Hood got run out of Tennessee. And to start off with this, I believe that Juneteenth starts off with uh, this medal. These medals, I like this picture because it's the best picture. It shows a picture of the black troops going over Overton Hill and chasing the Confederates out. Okay, now this is real history. Okay, but it was done in the 1800s. Okay, this is not something done by radical blacks in the 1960s. Okay, this was done in 1880. Okay, on that, this is a medal that's called the Butler Medal. And Butler gave it to the black troops that were at another battle. They were at the Battle of the Market Heights. And on this battle, on this medal, okay, on this medal, they have the words printed on the medal in Latin. And, oh, here it is. Okay, now that we got it up, it's, let's see, Furio, if anybody can speak Latin, okay, okay, but I can tell you what it means. It means freedom was won by them with the sword. Okay, and that's the most important thing about Juneteenth. Juneteenth should not be just a time to say, this is when somebody freed us. And the people that approved Juneteenth believe that that's what would happen, that it would just be a big picnic and everybody would talk about how they got, no, they won't say nothing about it. They just say, yeah, we know we got freed by Abraham Lincoln. And that's the end of it, right? Okay. That's not really what I believe that Juneteenth should be about. Juneteenth is the day, it's the time of 1864 in June when the word got to Texas that the war was over and the Union won. Now, I have a lot of problems with that. And you're going to see that as we go through. Okay, Texas did not have any black troops because the Emancipation Proclamation only freed people in states that were controlled by the Union. So the Union never got to Texas. They weren't fighting wars in Texas. The Texas Brigade is the Confederate Army from Texas. But when Lee threw the flag in to say we surrender unconditionally, we're not going, we give up on slavery, it's over. He did that in April 9th, okay? He did it in Richmond, Appomattox Courthouse, which we're going to get to. The Texas Brigade was there with Lee, but they were fighting black troops, okay? And so that's why it's so important to know your history, because the history that they want us to have is just eat, hot dogs and stuff on Juneteenth and say, thank you, Abraham Lincoln, for freeing us. But it didn't happen that way. And it also didn't happen with people saying, okay, let's support Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Let's do that. Everybody get behind that. That's a great idea. No, it started with abolitionists, and we need to know the whole story. And the story starts in slavery. So we have to go back there. Let's see. Okay, now one thing, I got this map a long time ago. I'm not gonna go try to dig it out. Okay, I have it here with me. This is a map of Africa, and it was made in 1908 by Germans. It's a German map, and I got it because I was interested in the Bushman. But then as I started looking at it, it said that this dark area right here, well, this is where black people in the United States came from. And the name of that area, it said N-E-G-E-R. Niger, N-E-G-E-R, that's German. And so I said, well, what does that mean? I had colleagues that worked with me at Delphi that were European. They were from, and so I knew that one of them spoke German. So I asked him, what's that? He says, oh, that's nigger. I said, uh-oh. And he called me nigger. I said, what's it? I was offended because I was typical. I didn't understand. I didn't understand at the time. He said, no, N-E-G-E-R means black. That means black in German. And so then I started studying it, and I found out they were right. He was right. And N-E-G-E-R means black in German. Negro means Spanish in German. They all have the same source. So when they came to this area, They named all these people in this area black, but they did it in Latin. And apparently Latin is really weird because it's spelled and pronounced different in all the different countries, in different countries. So Spanish say Negro. Okay, but the English, now they're the ones that were really kind of crazy. Theirs was Niger. Okay, and there's a country in Africa that's Niger. But all that word meant was English black. That's all. Okay. Now it doesn't take long to say, hey, where'd the other G come from? And what's going on? Well, we get into a few problems. That G came from, in fact, I talked to there's a woman, Laura Coates, I think, on CNN. She has a talk radio show. And she was talking about the N-word. I called in and talked to her. And yeah, she said, wait, and I said, no, this is where it comes from. I said, this is the way it is. And then she says, why do white people use it different from black people? And I said, I didn't answer it very good. I ain't gonna even repeat how I answered it because it was kind of dumb. I hadn't thought about it that much, but now I understand. The reason is because white people used it, black people, including my ancestors, when they were slaves, they were property. And that is the whole thing right there, because they were property. That's why their name became a slur. Okay? And because it's not the only people, they did it also to Chinese. They took a word, something like that, which meant Chinese worker. And because discriminated against them, that became a racial slur. Okay? So it happens in the English language. Okay, so, and anyway, and down here at the bottom, there's a group of people called the Bushmen. And on this German map, the Germans are really smart. They're really smart bunch of people. Because they said, okay, those people are a different race. And they said that back in 1908. Okay, the Germans, about 15 years ago, Stanford University did a study of DNA to find out who were the first, how did DNA fluctuate through the world. Look at all human DNA. And they did that and they found out, they said, hey, we got a source. We got Adam and Eve. We found out who the first humans were. And it happened to be the Bushmen. It happened to be these people right down here, right down at the bottom. And, okay, this is a great, I'm glad. Oh, yeah, okay, it was already there. I went to Africa and I spent some time with the Bushmen. And that's what they look like. The thing about, now me, us African Americans tend to have one heck of a lot of different ancestors from all over Africa. But we also tend to have a lot of European bloodlines. So I have 25% and I have 75% African. And it just so happens that that is actually the average for the whole United States. The average for the United States is 25% European, 75% African. That's average, the average African American. So we all have a lot of European blood. But what was interesting is that my color was the same color as the Bushmen. Okay. Now, if humans started there, then how did they change how they look? Okay, that gets more complicated. You got. I was using. This is the book I was using, The Journey of Man. This is where I found it. And this is based off the Stanford University study. Okay, yeah, you can move that around. Okay, and it tells you basically how the color, people change colors, how the color was, also how the hair texture changed. Okay, and as people left Africa and went into Europe, how it tells you what routes they took. Okay, so anyway, we should understand that about race because now when you talk to a somebody that deals with DNA, they say no, we only have one race. We don't have a bunch of races. They said it's only one, and they call that modern man. They said because the differences in us are so small that we can't say that there's a difference. So basically, how people look is more of a thing of where they came from. Whether you're talking about an Indian, and the thing about it is you'll see that people along the equator were very dark skinned. People far from the equator were white, yeah. And the reason is because they can handle, they needed more sunlight. And the light skin processes vitamin B. Vitamin B. Okay. So there's a reason for all the stuff. Okay. It just didn't happen like, they say it on the Bible, somebody got cursed, they got turned black, That's because they didn't know any better. But anyway, so, okay. Now this guy, I tend to I get upset. This is John Newton. John Newton wrote Amazing Grace. And yeah, there's a thing called the Southern perspective, okay? And so you have to watch the Southern perspective. Oh no, I'm fine. But in this Southern perspective, they said John Newton really didn't mean it. They said they said when he wrote Amazing Grace, he was just a hypocrite. See, when people talk like that, you got to be careful because they might be Southerners, okay? And that they did that all the time. And so, but when I read a book on John Newton, I found out it wasn't like that. He was offered a doctoral from the University of, I forgot what university it was. And he declined. And he said, the shores of Africa is where I got my education. He says, I will only accept a certificate for poor blacks. University of New Jersey. Okay, thanks. Okay, so the problem that we could have if we don't know that, we as blacks don't realize that we need to give John Newton his certificate that he's waiting for. Okay, and when they sing that song, you have to understand what he was talking about. He was a slave trader. Okay, let's see. Can you hold a second? Okay, that's all right. Okay, okay. This is the slaves. You want to hold the end of it? This came off a slave ship, so you can see that they must have been pretty small people because they had to take that whole ride like this. 3 people. Right. Okay. Well, slavery was wrong. Okay. I got some more slave stuff here. This is a slave collar. Like I said, I've been doing this over like 25 years, so I have a lot of experience. And oh, these are shackles. Okay. You know, there's no keys. I think that they just banged them closed with a hammer or something. But we have to understand that for our ancestors, this was real. And you can see the damage it did to them, knowing that this was their life. Okay, let's see. We'll try. By the Bible identity. I didn't just pick this up. Let's see. Yeah. This book was written by feet. I think they slide their feet into those. I don't even know how they made them lay down, and then they put those on them and push the rod through to close them up. It was brutal. It was brutal, but it took very strong people to be able to deal with that. Hmm, that's a slave collar. Yeah, they put it around your neck. Okay, this book says traveling on the slave journey to the Afro-Baptist faith. And this woman who did this work is an Israeli, but you can get in a lot of trouble doing this kind of stuff because a lot of people don't like what you might be saying. Okay, and so these people that write these books have to try to make a living. So they want to do something that makes money. But she is actually an Israeli. But the nice thing about being an Israeli is that she had a completely different perspective than, say, American would have. So she talked about the African faith first. She said, that's where we're going to start. And she said that all humans, including the Bushmen, you know, that's why we had to start going over with them. They were first. And when David Livingstone from England went to Africa, he met the Bushmen in the 1800s. And he said, they have a faith that's very similar to mine. He said, they have a concept of God that is mine. Well, what happened? Did his faith move to theirs? No, because no white people had come there when he was there. So it had already been there. So it didn't come from Europe. So since they were the first humans, it had to have come from them. And all these other people all around the world all have some different idea of God and religion. Okay, but the source was right there with the Bushmen. And so what she said was, Africa, the ones that came here, have a whole bunch of different tribes speaking all kinds of different languages. But the thing that is the same is that they believed in getting guidance and protection from their ancestors in heaven. Now that becomes very, very important because the Africans that came over, yeah. A question? Oh, you have a question? How does the Native American the Native Americans come into play with the way that humans occupied the world. They started in Africa, but I believe that they came into the United States from the top up by Bering Straits and then came down. And I've studied the Native Americans quite a bit, and I understand their religion, and it's the same. In fact, I spent time with the Nez Perce. I sweated with them. I went on an expedition with them. The Nez Perce Indians, that's Chief Joseph's group. I did that when I was like 25. But they believed in a thing called the Wyatt, and it was a power. It was basically, I can only compare it to what my African ancestors would call it, and they would call it the power of God. Well, the Nez Perce have the same thing. And see, that becomes very important in their life. And I don't want to jump around too much. Well, I guess I can. But anyway, I'm going to jump into the slave narratives real fast. Okay, the slave narratives, I first started my journey with Black Civil War soldiers. And I was taught to not have any respect for my slave ancestors. Well, you know who taught me that kind of stuff, okay? And so when I saw that book, I said, I'm not interested. Okay, that is the book of the slave narratives. Back in the 1930s, they said, you know, all the former slaves are about 70 years old right now. So they probably have pretty good minds. So why don't we interview them and find their side of the story? Because the American side of the story is they don't have a story because they're property. But when we read the slave narratives, we find that they're our ancestors, that they're people that we love. And they do have a story. It's just that a lot of people don't want to hear their story. Okay, so so anyway, let's keep going, and because that's the kind of thing that we're getting into right now is the power of God. Okay, I like this. This picture came out of that book, Bullwhip Days the Slaves Remember. The reason that I like that narrative is because, well, first of all, let me tell you where it comes from. The black colleges were the ones that were behind having this work done. And it was done during the WPA period, the 1930s, when they had the collapse in the economy. And so they sent writers out to interview all of these black people. And they let them say what they wanted to say. They talked about slavery. They said, this is what happened. This is who we are. And so this is what we get. The best narrative, when I stood in that bookstore and opened that up, I was going to put the book down because I didn't want to deal with no slavery. I was taught, you know, that wasn't a good place to go. And I was reading it, and I ran across one of the first ones is one by a woman called Mary Reynolds that was 100 years old. And because Mary was 100 years old, she was like in her 30s when slavery ended. So she has a very good memory of slavery. She had a really peculiar situation. She talked about how wonderful her father was. He was from Chicago, of all places. And he came down there looking for work. He was a piano tuner, okay? And Mary's mother was a slave. And he could not, Kilpatrick, who was her owner, would not sell her. And so he stayed there with her. And she said that he would always be a free man. and he was a free man, and that's the way slavery was. So there was a lot of free blacks, and my wife is the perfect example. Her last name, maiden name is Douglas, and it was a white girl that owned them back in the turn of the 1800s, and she was dying, and so she had it written in her will that they would be free when she died. And so they did. They died, and she died, and they were free, and their name was Douglas. And so they left Virginia because, and I want to talk about that some more. Virginia was rough, okay, but they had a lot of free blacks, and with the free blacks were leaving Virginia, and they wanted to go to Tennessee, Kentucky, and they actually said Kentucky was better than Ohio. They had more freedoms in Kentucky, and so that's why they went to Kentucky. Okay, so anyway, let's see. Okay, we go back to that last one real quick. I'm gonna just do it real quick. One more. Okay, that's one. Okay. They used to have a thing called a Princeton University professor called the Invisible Institution, because black religious services were unlawful, and they did not want them praying, and the reason is because they would pray for freedom, and so they restricted them from doing that, and so but they kept doing it, and the Princeton University professor called it the Invisible Institution. I call it the Stairway to Jesus. The reason I call it Stairway to Jesus is because that's what they said. That's the song they sang, which meant, let's go meet in the woods and have church. Let's go meet Jesus in the woods. These people were now see what had happened was, as the Israeli lady said, what they did was they substituted these ancestors that were in heaven because they were being bought and sold. So they were losing track of all their family. So Jesus started taking that position. And that's why they started to become these religious fanatics. And they used to say it in the slave narratives that they said, after slavery, they said, I'm a religious man now. He says, but back then in slavery, you was naturally more religious. It was, to show you the difference, it was some slaves in Tennessee. Slavery was the worst in the Delta. And so the slave trader bought a bunch in Tennessee, a bunch of guys, and said, I'm taking you guys to sell you in the Delta. And they knew how bad it was. And they said, I'd rather be dead than to face the endless cotton fields. Okay, so what actually happened was as they started to cross the river, they all decided, they were chained together, that they'd walk over the end of the boat. And they did. And the whole lot went over and drowned themselves. So that's how easy it was to lose your life if you did not have the power of God with you. And probably what happened then is that they didn't have their preacher with them. See, if they had a preacher like this gentleman with them, that wouldn't have happened. Because he would have said, hold on, God's gonna fix it somehow. He's gonna make a way. Okay? But without him, life could be very short. Okay? In fact, what happened was during that ceremony, when Mary's family snuck away to the woods, and this old black man said, the day is coming when we're only going to be slaves of God. But for right now, we got to bear on. We got to bear all. So at first, it took me a long time to understand what he meant by slaves of God. Okay? That it isn't just freedom. He says, no, it's slaves of God. Okay? So anyway, on their way home, you have to excuse me for using this term, nigger dogs. Okay? But that's their life. Okay? That's how they patrolled them and kept them from doing this. So they patrolled them on horses. Nigger dogs. They were to eat people. They were trained to eat people. Oh, slavery was, Mary Reynolds said, was things past telling. Slavery was tribulation as deep as you can get it.
So that's specifically bred to attack and kill people.
Yeah, like Mary says, I can't get people to read this stuff because it's too deep. Because you have to talk to them like this, and you have to go over it slow. Because it said, people would have a nervous breakdown when I told them what slavery was like. And I said, Mary Reynolds' aunt had a baby. It was a baby with one of the slave owners. Okay? The dogs caught her one night and ate her breast off. So, that's slavery. Okay? That's the slavery that they don't tell you about. Yeah. Okay, but that's slavery. And so anyway, what they did was, as the family was leaving, and you got to understand, well, sometimes we might say, oh, it's raining, I'm not going to church today. Or it's snowing. Well, how would you like to have to sneak past the dogs and the patrollers? That's how their faith was. Their faith was not a thing of how they look or a party. Their faith was their survival and their ability to handle tribulation. Yeah.
I want to ask a question. How many people in the audience know the history and know that they are descendants of enslaved people?
we all know.
So people that I stood at the grave site of my great grandparents who were slaves, and hearing this history and hearing this being told, it brings a reality to the life that they had to endure. So I just want to stop right there real quick so we just kind of dissect that and understand that people have lived in these conditions, people have died because there were particular things specifically done to them to terrorize their lives. I agree with that.
Okay. This is the law, as I mentioned before, that in Virginia, they were going to make a law to outlaw all Black prayer meetings at night, whether they were slaves or free Blacks. If you was Black, no. And they said that it was going to be a case of national security. Okay, so that's an article, but it's hard for me to get all that stuff because it's so much material. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna try. These are the slave revolts. Let's see. The first one is what? The Haitian revolt. Okay, and I tell you, Dewan Robinson is much better spokesman on that. You want to say anything about Dewan, about the Haitian slave revolt?
Dewan Robinson, everybody.
All right, okay. So I'm Dewan Robinson, and thank you, Mr. John White, for a phenomenal presentation. And just kind of let me step in for this part right here. So we talk about the Haitian Revolution, right? We know about 1804, right? Have you ever heard about 1804? If you're not, 1804 was when the Great Revolt took place in Haiti, right? And so what took place was you had a people who were looking to enslave the Haitian people, which was the French. French looking to come in to take over this and colonize Haiti, take their resources, enslave their people, right? Same old story. But what happened was the people of Haiti said they wasn't happy. So they fought back. You understand, when you understand the climate and the terrain of Haiti, it's a very mountainous area, right? So what they did was they beat them on their own soil. So they was hiding in the mountains. They were able to beat them off the land, and they defeated them twice. Not once, but twice. And they didn't have the heavy artillery that the French had at those times. Well, what Haitians did, they had a powerful spirit, and they had the uncanny ability to win. And so what that did was they sent a clear message to the French that they were not allowing them come in their community, come in their country, and take over their country. And what they did was fought them off, and they retained their country and regained the power, and they made their own constitution after that. See, a lot of times from making their own constitution, they outlaw who can buy land in their area, right? This is visionary type of stuff. So now you only make it affordable and make it a way for your people that come from the area. And that was so beautiful about the Haitian people. But what happened was at the same time, they got cut off from the rest of the world. If you understand where Haiti is now, it's at a destitute place. And we should be helping them out, meaning that we help support, send food, send resources, send whatever information that we can to help them get over, because they are not getting supported from nobody, but they continue to thrive. The people of Haiti have beautiful spirits. We're talking about they're very spiritual people. So now they're in a situation where they need our assistance and our support. But I want to talk about some of the players at the time. There was two main warriors at the time. And I want you to understand the contrast and difference between the two. So you had Trufant. Trufant was one. He was a military guy. He came up. He fought in a revolution, but then also he worked alongside with the French, right? He was a partner with the French, right? And I want to make sure that we pin that. He was a partner with the French, and he was able to go ahead and learn a lot, but he was able to go back and forth to French and then Haiti, but then he had a relationship with them. What happened to Trufant, he ended up found dead in a French prison. Clear indication. He had Toussaint. He thought that he had a relationship with them, where to the point where he was able to work and be friends with them. At the end of the day, they killed him. Right? So Jean-Jacques Dessalines was the next one who came up after. He came right after Toussaint. And he learned from those ways. He learned what they did to Toussaint. So he was saying that, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and defend my people. I'm going to be about my people. I want to make sure that I do and fight on behalf of us. So I don't want to be in a relationship with the French because what they did to Toussaint. So he outlawed the French, right? He protected Haiti. And he was the reason why the revolution went on. So he is the reason why 1804 happened. He is the reason why Haiti is an independent country. He is the reason why they developed their own constitution. He is the reason why they're still in the position they are today, right? So it's a compare and contrast with two different soldiers, two different warriors with two different mentalities and two different perspectives on life and what they wanted for Haitian people. The one you remember in history is Jean-Jacques Dessalines. So I want y'all to remember those names. What's his name? Toussaint was who? He was the first one to die. He opened the door for the French and they killed him. Jean-Jacques Dessalines, he closed the door. And he cut him off. And that's how Haiti became strong. Yes, sir. Come on. Say it again. Open two. See? Yes. And so I just really want us to understand that it's very important that we know that we have to work in concert with each other, right? We have to be very strategic how we move, and we have to be willing to die for what we believe in. That was the same thing that we heard about during the Civil War, during slavery, during the Atlantic slave trade. People were willing to die because they weren't going to a land that they knew nothing about, right, against their will. And so those are the champions that we might not know about, but I'm glad we're having conversations so folks can get a good insight. We should research. There's a movie, actually 1804. You can watch the documentary, kind of break down a lot of this information as well. But for us, we have to understand that concentrated power is important and believing in our own abilities. Yeah. Because we can and we will and we have ran whole countries, right? We are the original contributors to civilization, right? So you should never feel ashamed of who you are. You should never be feel inferior about what we've done. And even when we in this country, and always understand, we populated the whole world. This used to be all one, right? So it wasn't no breakdown in 7 different continents because it was all one. That was all of us. So when you understand what role we played in this world, understand slavery only played a very small piece. I know they talk about that all the time. And for you young folks, know that we did not start in slavery. That's not our inception. You understand that you come from great leaders, right? And we just making our way back. So I'm just glad to share a little bit of history, a little information. Thank you, brother, too. Definitely, what I'm saying? I encourage everybody to take time out to learn about 1804, learn about the Haitian Revolution, learn a lot of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, learn about Toussaint. There you go, your old boy. But definitely, I think that's a key point. So appreciate the time and opportunity to share.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ron. I just realized I skipped over something that was really important. Back to that Still the Way to Jesus meeting with that Mary Reynolds was at. Well, on their way home, they were Mary Reynolds' mother, father, and Mary Reynolds, and she said her sister was with her. And they started hearing those dogs, and she says, "Oh, those are she says, "That's those nigger dogs. They're going to eat us." And then they said, "Come on." And then, her father said, "Here, I want y'all to stay here and hide inside this little tree trunk." And so they took off and they split up and went in different directions. And then they came back and picked them up, and they all got into the cabin. And then she said, "Moss says that's the power of God." And so, okay, although the slaves had no power, but what they learned and cherished was the power of God. And that's something that we can learn from them. And that is a very important lesson, because a lot of us have lost. My best friend died to suicide, when he was in his 20s, and the others died of drug overdoses. And we have to learn that secret from our ancestors of relying on the power of God. Okay, so now back to here, we're going to catch up. So, but see, that was a victory. You got to understand. You say, well, they have no power. They're victims. No, they were victors. Okay? In Jesus' eyes, they were victors. Okay? Now, let's see. Can we go back to the second one? We're going to do this real fast. Okay, the next one was Denmark Vesey. I just copied this stuff off Wikipedia. They hung everybody that was associated with it, but there was no real revolt. But they said it was a plan for revolt. And one of the things that happened in slavery was there was always slaves that would tell on you. And they would do it. They did it, and that's why, blacks had a real problem with these types of people that they couldn't trust, because they would turn in people just to be closer to their masters, to their owners, to be favored, for their own selfish favor. Okay. Now the next one was Nate Turner. Nate Turner was like in 1930. Now, one thing about it is they tried to say that Nate Turner calls the clamp down on black religious meetings. But we've got a newspaper article saying that they were doing it against free blacks back in 1804. So it was way before Nate Turner, but it was to avoid, they said, Nate Turner. And that was because the idea was getting around, like I said, back to the Israeli lady, that blacks were starting to see their future in the Bible. Things like Revelation 7, where it talks about all these different tribes speaking all a bunch of different languages. And they come in together and they're in great tribulation, but they wear pure white that's been cleansed by the blood of the Lamb. Okay? And now they don't have to cry anymore or thirst anymore. Okay? That's basically the promised land. Okay? And so a lot of people, I believe, could find some type of hope in that. I have a little bit of story with that. I had a relationship with Colin Powell. I gave him a few of my books. I don't really want to go into that too much. But in my book, it talks about that how this religion was passed on. And there is an example, and the example was the Pilgrim Jubilee. And they have a song called Blood Child. And they said in that song, Blood Child, they said, well, this father told his daughter that she couldn't go to church. And she said, I wanna go I hear him singing these songs. And he said, no, you can't go. And so she went there and she had this experience with Jesus. And so she was so happy she came back and told him. And so what he did was he picked up a stick and started beating her till she was all covered with blood. Okay. Then her mother comes home and he says, well, what happened? He says, I saw Jesus. I went to see Jesus. And they said, he said, why did your father beat you like this? And it was because I wanted to see him. And she said that, she said, would you do one thing for me? She said, take these bloody clothes and put them away, because I want to show Jesus the blood that I bled for. Now that's a song. All you got to do is Google Pilgrim Jubilee Child's Blood. Okay, now I posted this on my Facebook because Colin Powell did this at his funeral. At his funeral, he had a general read from Revelations 7:10, that whole verse that I just talked about. And then after that, a beautiful black girl comes down and sings Precious Lord. Okay? Well, the thing about it is, in Pilgrim's Jubilee, that's the name of the song, Precious Lord. And the thing about it, what amazed me though, is that in that song, they substitute the father from the slave owner. Because the slave owner did that all the time. They beat them and with these whips. And when they would whip you, you'd be covered with blood. These things, okay? And you'd be covered with blood. But what Colin Powell taught me was that, hey, it doesn't matter who the person that whipped you was. So because the slave master, because it could be the slave master or the girl's father. The big thing is that the principle was the love of Jesus. As he said, told her mother in this song to wrap these bloody clothes up and give them to, because I want to show Jesus how I bled for it.
Now, the thing about it is why I'm going over this so slowly and carefully is because when we get to Black Civil War soldiers, you'll know who they are. Because if you don't go through this, you don't know them. They were not Black white people. Okay? They were their own people in their own situation, dealing with it in the way that they knew how. Okay? Okay. So I really feel good about that because I think that we're all on the same page with that. Okay, we can go to the next now. Okay, John Brown. Okay, how did John Brown get into this? Oh, can you put me those? Okay. Okay, John Brown, his plan was to arm the Negroes. And John Brown knew Harriet Tubman. He knew Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass didn't want to go with him, but they all thought it was suicide. And he told us, he wrote a letter to his wife saying, you know, well, I lost, but all I got to do is hang by the neck for a few minutes and everything is going to be corrected. And he was right, because they say that that's what started the Civil War. And I want to pass this around. This is a picture of John Brown being led out to hang, and he stopped and he stopped. You can pass this around. He stopped in to kiss a Black child on his way to the gallows. Now that really angered Southerners. Okay. What really happened, though, I mean, even William Wells Brown, which I haven't talked about yet, he believes that had actually happened, but that didn't really happen. But something just as profound really is what happened. What really happened was ministers were coming to him wanting to hear his last rites or something. And he said no. And he told the reporter, no, I won't see none of them. He said, because anybody that supports slavery can't tell me anything. I'd rather go to the gallows with a slave woman and her child. And so that was the real story that happened. And so they put that in the paper, and they turned the myth that he stopped to kiss a colored child on the way to the gallows, which he would have did anyway, because that would have been okay with him. And so he stopped and kissed the legend came out that that's what happened. But in reality, what really happened was he was saying any clergy that supported slavery is really not clergy, which is a deep statement. And that was a deep strike to the people in the South, because they were for slavery. And they were saying slavery is okay. But John Brown was saying, no, slavery's not okay. Jesus ain't for it. Okay, let's see. Can we go to the next one? Oh, this one. This is a mural that's on the wall of the Capitol building in Kansas. And it shows the Union on one side and the Confederates on the other side. And they were basically saying John Brown started the Civil War. And he's got a rifle in one hand and a Bible in the other. And that's what scared everybody about John Brown. Now, but the people that were actually the biggest, he was the martyr for, was Black people. He was a martyr for Black people. So much so, it even affected my family. See, when you
got out of slavery, you took your last name. My grandfather, you took the last name from the people that owned you. My grandfather had an uncle named John Brown, but there was no Browns in the area. And so he just picked John Brown, because that's what John Brown was a martyr at that time. And, but anyway, my grandfather named my father after his uncle. So, except my father's name is John White, and I'm John White Jr. So basically, my name came from John Brown. So anyway, okay. Now this one's really, really important. Let's see. You see that one anywhere? We'll find it and pass it around. But let me tell you where. Yeah, keep going. Let's see. Okay. No. Okay, well, you just have to look at the big picture. Okay, the reason that this picture is so important is because this is all that's left of Black history. This is the only thing that survived, this image. This is the image in the South that survived. All the other stuff from now on, when we get into the military, disappeared. So this is the history that you're left with. And so when you get with the N word and you get with this picture, now you get to see why we got so many issues. Okay? But it's false. It's not real. And it only is a reflection of us not knowing our history. Now this paper was published in 1862 when the Civil War started. And they were basically saying that these what happened was when they freed Black people in the South, they had Black men, and General Butler said that they're contraband. In other words, we don't have to return them to the South. Okay, General Butler is the one that came up with that. Because see, they had the fugitive slave law that said you got to return people back to the South. But Butler said, no, not anymore. We're going to call them contraband, and we're going to keep them. Okay, now, the picture next to it is a contraband church service. And so now we're getting back to their faith, which is very, very important. And practically all Civil War reenactors don't touch religion. Okay, and that's because Black reenactors copy white reenactors, and they don't do religion. Okay, but I'm different. I started an organization called the Gospel Army Black History Group. And we believe that that is the core of the Black soldier. Okay, we can keep going. This is a picture of the 1st South Carolina Colored Volunteers. There was a guy named David Hunter that was a general, and he was a friend of Abraham Lincoln. So they put him in charge of the South. And the first thing he did was organize the 1st South Carolina Colored Volunteers. They called themselves the Gospel Army. They said that they were a religious army. Okay? So that's why I spent all this time talking about religion, because that's who these guys were. And then Hunter said, since the day there hasn't been an army this religious since the days of Cromwell, and Cromwell's army was invincible. So if we talk about how good this army was going to be, we have to make sure that we give God the glory, okay? Because these were very religious people. The white officers involved with them were also extremely religious, because they were abolitionists. The only guy that would want to be in charge of a black army unit was an abolitionist. Okay, so the name of this painting one of these guys is a guy named Colonel Higginson. Colonel Higginson was a Unitarian minister. He was also a secret supporter of John Brown. And when the war started, he took over. First thing, when Lincoln found out that Hunter started the first South Carolina Volunteers, he shut them down because the planters were complaining. And so he says, no, we're not raising a black army yet. And so, but later, General Butler comes along and tells President Lincoln that that's the only way to solve the Negro problem. It's to Arnold like John Brown, or to continue John Brown's plan. Okay, so Colonel Higginson was mentioning how these guys looked very much like athletes, and they were in very good condition because of what they had been through in the South. Okay, let me go next. Okay, that is, now we can pass that one around, can we? Oh, okay. Did you pass that one? Oh, no, okay. Okay, this is actually the fourth United States Colored Troops. The United States Colored Troops, when they opened the door to them, because they came with the Emancipation Proclamation, they stuck it at the end. See, they'll tell you, oh, and Lincoln freed the slaves with the Emancipation Proclamation. Well, he also created a black army with the Emancipation Proclamation that they don't tell you about. Okay, it was 130,000. It was 135 regiments. Okay, they fought in 400 battles. Let's see. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Okay, Harriet Tubman. Okay. This is typical of Black history, of the history. See, our history has got a Southern perspective. And very few people argue with me because I've been doing this for like 25 years. I know a lot about it. So very few. The only person that ever argued with me about it is the guy that put up the sign about the Gambahee River raid. And he said no. Because see, I was saying Harriet Tubman was the first woman to lead organize an army, to lead the army in the battle. And he said no. He said Harriet Tubman was just a nurse. Okay, and she just kind of hung up. Well, see, that's typical South. And I told him, I said, look, you have the Southern perspective, And I try to be friends with him on First Grade. He gets mad at me, don't like me, because I do stuff like this. And I say, no. Well, what happened was the History Channel backed me up. And they came out and said it flat. Harriet Tubman was the first woman to organize a military operation in the United States. It was the Gambahee River raid. The reason was because General Hunter, we go back to General Hunter, he was contacting the governor of Massachusetts about building black regiments. And they said, hey, we're going to send you Harriet Tubman. So they sent Harriet Tubman down there. And he said, look, I want to destroy the mines on the Gambahee River. And she said, give me Montgomery. Because she wasn't in the military, but she was John Brown called her General Tubman. And she said, give me Montgomery, and he'll do the military part of it. And they did, and that was a successful operation. And they said that I think that they recovered 500 slaves, but it was very successful. Okay, so Harriet Tubman is the first woman. The History Channel agrees with that now. Okay, it's not just John White that said it. Okay, I got it from Harriet Tubman's book. She wrote a book, and she said, "Hey, General Hunter came to me and asked me to do stuff," and I said, "Okay, this is how we're gonna have to do it. We're gonna need a leader like Montgomery, because operating a physical army requires a lot of technical skill. You have to be in the military to do it." And so, anyway, it was successful. The first battle that Black troops were in was the Battle of Port Hudson. Now that one is important. The reason that's important is because General Butler, they're from New Orleans. And they were originally Confederates. But because New Orleans was weird, New Orleans was not like the Delta. New Orleans, that's because they had a history of French and Spanish slavery, which was not as bad as American Delta slavery, which was the worst. Okay, and so these guys, some of these guys owned slaves, and they were called people of color. Well, what happened, and so when the Confederates started organizing, they organized them. Those guys, they had their own black regiments. And so, but they refused to let them into the Confederate Army. Because they said, the stuff that you're doing in New Orleans doesn't go along with Alabama, Mississippi, and the rest of the Delta. Because they were racist. You know, they were pure racists. And said, you guys are different. And so Butler saw it as an opportunity to bring them over to the Union. And he did. They were the first regiment to join the Union Army. And they were called the Louisiana Native Guard. They had black officers. And their first battle was the Battle of Port Hudson. And they went in with a full regiment of 900 men. And they only came out with 300. And that's because they attacked it 3 times. And it was suicide. But they had they had a big weight to carry, because the world was basically saying, you guys are slaves because you won't fight and die for your own freedom. And that's what America is about. Therefore, like I said, that's where the N-word comes in, okay? It comes back to that kind of stuff. So these guys knew that. They knew that they couldn't run, that they had to do it. And they did. And so that was the biggest casualty over the whole Civil War of one regiment at one battle at one time like that. Okay? And so that was the first battle. But it opened the door, because they were right. It was like John Brown when he got home. It got in the newspaper. And they said, hey, these guys are for real. And so anyway, okay, now we get to Milliken's Bend. Those were free blacks. New Orleans had free blacks. These guys at Milliken's Bend were former slaves. And they said, okay, we know that free blacks to do that, but how about these slaves? And what happened there was basically the white troops that were with them ran during one of the Confederate charges. And the black troops didn't run, and that was because some of their brothers that were being captured were being murdered. And that was because the Confederacy when Abraham Lincoln laid out this Emancipation Proclamation, they said, we are not going to take black troops alive. We're going to kill them. Tell them that, and they thought that that would scare them, that they wouldn't show up. But it had the opposite effect. And Milliken's bid, white troops ran, and then the black troops actually charged into the Confederates. And well, I think they won the hand-to-hand battle. But it got a message across to them that William Wells Brown said that that the Southern planters have lost their glory, that the blacks will never bow down to them again. Okay, this is the battle. Now we're starting to get up to, oh yeah.
Question is, how did they become free? They were slaves, but they became free. How did they become free before anybody else?
I'm not sure, but that's a good question. I think that was down around New Orleans, where the Union was starting to get territory. And as they were starting to get territory, they could get those blacks contrabands and form an army down there in that location. Because that's the only way you could do it. The Union had to have control of that territory. Now this one here is the Battle of Fort Wagner. The big thing that William Wells Brown, let me tell you about William Wells Brown. William Wells Brown is the first black historian. He wrote the first black history books. This is the first black book. I'm sorry. Thanks. It's falling apart. That's because this book was written in 1867. And this book has black Civil War history in it. All the stuff that I've been telling you, like General Hunter's letter talking about how religious these guys were, came out of that book. Because he was a former slave. So when he wrote the book about black Civil War history, he wrote a book from the perspective of a slave, from the perspective of a black person. Because everybody else, were not doing that. White historians would even say black soldiers weren't even religious. That's because they write from a different perspective. And I wrote a book, and that's what you have to do. You have to write your own books. But when people don't know the history, they can't do that. So the most important thing is for people to know the history. Let's see, which one we have next? Battle of the Crater. That's a good one. Okay. In 1864, that's when General Grant took over. And General Grant told General Butler, who had the Army of the James, and the Army of the James was 1/3 black. And their target was Richmond. And they also, before going to Richmond, though, they felt that they had to go to Petersburg. And so the attack was at Petersburg, but it wasn't, the defenses were too strong at Petersburg, because this was after Gettysburg. See, at Gettysburg, General Lee lost so many men. He says, we're not going to do any more frontal attacks. We're going to let the Union come to us, because we don't have the manpower to take these frontal attacks. We'll let them take them. And so, but the black troops had done so well at Petersburg that General Burnside said, man, let's use the black troops in a good way, in the most effective way that they can be used. So what he was gonna do was have a tunnel dug down underneath the line by miners, put a lot of gunpowder in it, blow up the line, and then the black troops were supposed to rush in around the crater and go in and capture Petersburg. General Grant, who was in charge of the whole thing, he looked at it and said, why are you picking black troops to do this? Are you saying somehow that black troops are better than white troops? And then he said, no, it's just that we've been training them. We think that they're better suited to do this. Which one? Oh, that book is called The Negro and the American Rebellion by William Wells Brown, written in 1867. It's very hard to find. But anyway, oh, sorry, there are things. But anyway, so what they did, General Grant said, no, I'm substituting my white troops for the black troops. Okay, so the battles, so the mine goes off and there's a big explosion. And but the white troops weren't trained. They weren't even trained. They went down into the crater. And the Confederates just wiped them out. So then Grant sends black troops in there. He says, get them out of there. Don't say, you got to go save the white troops. But they had lost the element of surprise. And so it turns into a disaster for the black troops. And so they called Grant, Congress called Grant to come to Washington and explain what's going on happened at the crater. And after they finished and investigated, they said Burnside was right by selecting black troops for this situation and this thing. And he said, we want you from now on to use black troops effectively. And so General Grant was commanded that he had to use black troops effectively. And so so now we're going to go up to September 1864. In November, there was an election coming, and President Lincoln was expected to lose. And the reason he was expected to lose was because the nation did not like dying for emancipation of black people. They thought it was a bad idea, because you got to understand, these people were still kind of racist, okay? So Butler said, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to attack because see, since the Union had to do these frontal attacks, they were dangerous. You got the Confederates sitting behind obstacles, shooting you while you charge. And so they said, well, Butler said, I'm going to show I can do what I can do with black troops, that I can destroy Richmond's outside defenses. I can destroy their defenses. I can put the black troops on the flank, and I can attack New Market Heights, and that'll crush the whole line. And he said, I'm going to send my white troops around to attack the middle. Well, what actually happened was it was really bloody, it was really hard. But the black troops captured New Market Heights. And for the first time in history, black troops, it was such a big deal. This was September 29th. Lincoln all of a sudden won the election. Okay, but they gave out 15 Congressional Medals of Honor to black troops for the first time in history. These were the first Medals of Honor given out. And this other medal here, this big one here, is called the Butler Medal, and it's pure silver. And what Butler did was he gave 200 of these out to the black soldiers. And so that signaled a lot. It meant that put the black troops on the flank. This right here is Fort Pillow Massacre. At Fort Pillow, remember I said the Confederates had taken a policy that they would not take black soldiers prisoner. So what they did was they massacred kids, black women, everybody. Okay, the guy who did that was a guy named General Forrest, Nathaniel Forrest, who happened to, after the war, decide to be the leader of the KKK. Because he came to the black people after the war was over and said, look, why don't y'all go back and be slaves? And they said, no, we're going to do that. And then he said, we're going to have to get rough. And so he started the KKK. Okay, so that's who you're dealing with. But it's not just Forrest's problem. The Confederates made that policy when blacks entered the field that they would not take black soldiers. So they didn't. They murdered them on all the battles. Okay. Let's see. Oh, okay. This next one is the Black Cavalry. They had 6 Black Cavalry units. And I'll basically tell you, one of them was at the Battle of the Big Black River, I believe. The white troops were having a hard time carrying a bridge. And so black troops came, the cavalry came, and they attacked the bridge and defeated a force that was twice their size. Okay, the other one was the Battle of Saltville. My wife's great grandfather was in the 114th Colored Troops, and they were out of Fort Nelson in Kentucky. And that's where the black troops were cavalry, and they went to Saltville. And, you know, they were hassled along the way, said that they wouldn't fight. They stole their horses, threw their hats around. But these guys were very disciplined. And that's why it's so important to go over their religion and go over their beliefs. Okay? Because they were able to withstand these indignities. And then when they got to the battle, they actually carried the whole battle. Okay? And the commander said that he's been in 18 battles and he's never seen white troops fight better than they did. But that gets back to the religion. It gets back to what General Hunter said when he said, never since the days of Cromwell has an army this religious come along, and they were invincible. Okay? Okay, this is the Battle of Nashville. Like I said, by then, they knew how to use black troops. And at Nashville, the black troops were not, they were only like 10% of the Union Army there. And they put them on the flank of the Union line. And their charge of Overton Hill was so good and strong, it made Hood pull his guys off of his line and swing them all the way over to try to stop the blacks from coming up that hill. And the whole army collapsed. And because there were so many white troops there. And so that became a tactic. Put the black troops on the flank, let them do this strong attack, and let the Confederates try to move over in front of them, and then the Unions walk right in behind them. Okay? Okay, that happened down in the battle. And see, the thing about it is you know that that's important because black scholars didn't make that painting. Those paintings came from people of the time. And it showed when they did the Battle of Nashville they showed black troops attacking and carrying Overland Hill. Okay. This was Paul Richmond. Okay. Paul Richmond. So what happened there was they had a large black army. It was called the 25th Corps. It was broken into 3 divisions. One division went into Richmond, and my wife's great-grandfather was part of that. They went into Richmond. They went into Richmond and occupied the city. They met with President Lincoln in Jeff Davison's house. So they set up there. And then they said the people there were starving, they were very hungry. And Lincoln and General Winslow said, what should we do with them? And he said, let them up easy. If I were you, I'd let them up easy, let them up easy. Well, I'm saying that because that's important, because they're going to tell you General Grant, President Lincoln told General Grant that. He didn't, because General Grant was at Petersburg. He told General Winslow that of the Black Army. Okay, but that's what they do all the time. They say, oh, people don't know their history, so we can get away with it. So anyway, okay, we go. Okay, so what they did, Winslow did with his 2nd division was he sent them to Petersburg, because General Grant was at Petersburg to try to end the Civil War, because this was the last holdout for General Lee. And they did it again. They put the black troops right in front of Petersburg. Except this time they got so crazy. They said, no, we don't want you to use your guns. We want you to stand there and wave at them. That's how bad they were getting. You know, they said, we're going to put this whole black army, it was a black division. We're going to put them right in front of Petersburg. And now we want them to just wave like this. Because the idea was the Confederates were going to come over to where the blacks are and say, this is where the attack is coming from. Okay, so what they did was, that's what they actually happened. And General Grant came in with his white troops and swept Lee's line. Okay, and then, but who's in front of Petersburg? The black troops. Who's the first to enter Petersburg? The black troops. Who's the ones that's chasing Robert E. Lee? The black troops. So now you got the black army right behind Robert E. Lee. He's on his way to Appomattox. Okay, so the cavalry goes to Appomattox, and the Union cavalry tries to beat him to the railroad station to get Lee's supplies, and he does that. And then the black army gets there, and Lee sees that he's trapped. So what he has to do is bust through the black army. And so that's what he tries to do, but he sees all these black guys and just gives up. They push him for about a mile, and then he throws in the white flag. And so that's how Robert Lee actually, now, at that time, all black people are free. No more slavery. Lee threw it because Grant told him, see, Lee was trying to negotiate slavery, but because he had to throw the flag in, it was over. So when they talk about Juneteenth and word out to Texas, no, it was happening in the East. Okay, it was happening at Appomattox Courthouse. Okay, I think we only got one more. Okay. Oh, this is Charleston. Charleston was very important. Okay, remember I said that all these guys, that they're no longer going. What happened was, since they weren't accepting blacks as prisoners, General Grant said, we're going to end prisoner exchange. Well, that was a death sentence. for a lot of black white soldiers. Okay, and so what happened was in Charleston had a prison for white soldiers, and they were all in a big mass grave. The black people in Charleston, after the black first to enter the city of Charleston was black soldiers. And since they came through, they decided to have a big parade. 10,000 people participated in that parade. It was very sophisticated, flowers and all kind of stuff. Okay. But then they said, let's dig up these white prisoners of the Union and give them a proper burial. And they did. Then they said, now let's repeat that parade. And that is the first Memorial Day. Okay, the very next year, they adopted Memorial Day for the country, but that's where it started. And like I'm saying, this stuff, black people don't know this history. I talked to, I think Jim Fiborn, I talked to him. I traded him my book. I said, here. And I paid for his. He made me pay. Okay, but he signed it. And I asked him, I said, do you know about Memorial Day? He didn't. And he's from Charleston. And I found out that that's extremely common. That people don't know. They don't realize the history is so rich because they're trained to be victims and look at their history and identity as victims and don't realize what the truth is. Okay, got one more? Okay, after the war, there was a group called the Fifth Jubilee Singers, and they went up to a college in northern. They were trying to raise money for their college, black college, and that the KKK couldn't burn down, and so they needed a lot of money. So they were trying to sing the songs that were of the time, popular songs. But nobody was listening to them. Nobody cared. And then one time when they got to Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio, up near Cleveland, that was the religious school. They started singing "Still Away to Jesus," and then all of a sudden everything changed. They said people started weeping. The audience started to weep. And they said that that led to extreme popularity. They started singing for governors, for congressmen. Then they started touring Europe and started singing for queens and kings. And then other black colleges says, well, we got that culture too, so we can sing. And so they started doing the practice too. So, but the big thing to end with is that the basic thing was they were giving God the glory. Okay, and when you don't do that, you can have a lot of problems. A lot of why it's so good to understand your history is because it's real. A lot of singers learn to sing, black singers in my day learned to sing in the church. But their songs didn't make money for them. So they instead of saying, oh, I love Jesus, they turn to, oh, I love my baby. Okay, now the problem is that before long, you start hearing about these people dying and having all kind of problems. Okay, so that's why it's so important to know your identity and to know where you came from. Sorry it took so long, but you can see it's a long story. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I was a Civil War reenactor. This is my bayonet. I don't have my musket with me, but we keep our caps in here. And in here, we keep our powder. Yeah. So we pull one of these out, tear it off, and pour the powder down. Then we have to pack it. Then we put a bullet in and pack that, and then lift it up. Then we pull out a firing cap. That's it.
It's the way it was, you know, and yeah, and then you put the firing cap on, and then fire. Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, then you fire. And so
So did everybody shoot like that? The reason why I'm asking.
yes. Yes, that's why, like I was talking to one guy and it says, he was actually one of my psychiatrists. And he said, that's suicide. You guys are so stupid to do that. And I said, no, but I was a reenactor for a long time and I was in white regiments, which meant I had an opportunity to go to Gettysburg and the guys I was with were from Flint. They were the Flint regiment. And what happens is the basic thing is you always want to keep your gun on one gun on the enemy while the guy behind you was loading. Okay. And so you couldn't fire until he told you he was ready. Okay. And then when he says he's ready, then you can fire and then you start to reload. So that's just those were tactics, European tactics, and for their guns, that's the way you had to do it. Now, as soon as they had automatic rifles, no way, they ain't crazy. You know, they would change their tactics. You know, but when you know, if they had one, yeah. Yeah.
So during that era that they were doing what they were doing, Gatling gun, when it was introduced in Israel, or it changed the whole dynamic. And it was introduced in Africa against the Civil War. So when they introduced that, after they were defeated pretty much every time they fought, when they introduced Gatling gun in Africa, that's changed the whole different and created a whole different it changed the dynamic of how Africans were able to defeat their enemies.
I consider it now. As you did.
And this is officially question and answer time.
So this particular thing that you've done today, how can we capitalize this so that young people can see this for generations to come?
Well,
Now the reason why I'm asking is, I would like for you to do it so that it's documented, either YouTube, some type of social media where it can be seen over and over again.
well,
Would you be interested in that?
oh yeah, I do it, but I've been doing this a long time.
That's the reason why you should be the one to do it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I understand. But the big thing is that the general public needs to know the history because then you have more power. Because then you can say to the school board, why aren't you teaching that Black people started Memorial Day? I mean, you know, like I told Clever, you know, well, why? I mean, that's a no-brainer. You know, you don't have to know all this detailed stuff, you know, but at least do some of the stuff, you know. Oh, okay, yeah, thanks. But you know, and I want to thank everyone for coming because I really appreciate it. It gives, you know, it makes me feel like I'm not crazy, you know. So, okay, that is information that is important, and our heritage, this is our true heritage. We should know our true heritage. Okay. Amen. Okay, thank you. Thank you all for coming. So if everybody, the food was catered by Island Express. If you go on Facebook and give them a good review, if you love the food or like the food. And also another thank you to Mr. White, and another thank you to Mother Deloney and Mr. DeJuan Robinson. Sir? Oh, the Island Express is located where the Max B used to be on Pearson, on King and Pasadena.
Everybody signed in? Hey, you want seconds? Please get seconds.
Hello, everybody. I really enjoyed this history in regards to slavery today, but I just wanted to say that George F. Washington II, today is his birthday, June 13th, and he turned 45, and he doesn't want me to say all this, but I did anyway.
This is my mother.
Oh, that was good. She goes.
So we have this gentleman that wants to speak.
I come to speak to everybody. This is a good story in here. It's one of the best that I've ever had and ever heard. I did 30 years in the service. All types of things happen. And I come here to prove that he's telling 100%. I really enjoyed that. He's the best.
So one other thing too. So this gentleman has a Vietnam hat on. So if everybody could say welcome home and thank you for your service to this gentleman, it'd be great. Welcome home.
Okay, good.
Yes, I learned that. That's what they said. It's like a whole thing of price.
I was when you try to you got your see, no, I can't tell you your well, yeah, you know, and you don't have you don't have opportunity to have it's not real. It's not You put in
This is no more. You still using this chair?
We will. Because we had to made you.
Good evening, I'm Rebel. I encourage all people to get involved, get all invested, take the legal space so that you can protect yourself and remain healthy and be strong and get out and vote.
That was that. You did.
One thing they call us public speaking. Say it loud. My phone died, so I got it out.
Yeah, got out the stuff on the floor. Yeah, in a minute, man. Still live. You're live.
Still does.
Live. All right. Say something before I turn it off, Mr. White.
Oh, hey, thanks for the opportunity to be here. And you guys just did a great job.
Well, you did all the work.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be by myself. It wouldn't have been this. Okay, you guys did.
Well, you would have meat on the bone.
Yeah.
Well,
We were a team.
Well, I appreciate
That's what
you
we
allowing
got.
me to be a part of
We
it.
were a team. Yeah,
Okay.
that's it.
All right, we out. If I could ever get this thing to go.
Yeah, I can get that out. That card.